Hello, my name is Nelly Strehlau. I work at Mikołaja Kopernikus University in Toruniu, and today I am going to talk to you about paranoia, conspiracies, and their representations on American television. So, let me begin with a definition of paranoia. The word paranoia comes from Greek, originally meaning madness in general. In diagnostic manuals such as ICD-10, it is connected to a number of conditions and symptoms, and the one most closely aligned with what I'm focusing on today is paranoid personality disorder, which involves a tendency to perceive danger, hostility, and contempt in neutral actions, being prone to suspecting even loved ones of hidden agendas, and exaggerated belief in one's importance as the victim of persecution. Of course, in a conspiracy thriller, all those fears may turn out to be legitimate, to be correct. Literary and cultural scholars in the field of affect studies, the study of emotions, are also preoccupied with paranoia, but their definitions and focus differ from the medical approach. So, for instance, Sayen Ngai, in her book Ugly Feelings, defines paranoia not as a mental illness, but as a species of fear based on the dysphoric apprehension of a holistic and all-encompassing system. In turn, Eve Kosowski-Sedgwick, in her book Touching Feeling, in the chapter Paranoid Reading and Reparative Reading, or You're So Paranoid, You Probably Think This Essay Is About You, it is about us, defines paranoia as a practice or stance rather than diagnosis or personality, and she draws attention to two significant aspects of paranoia. The first one is that paranoia is both affective and cognitive. It is not just about how you feel, but about how you organize, seek, and find knowledge, information. However, Kosowski is quite critical of paranoia. She says that paranoia knows some things well, but it knows other things poorly, because to be paranoid is not to be knowledgeable, but rather to be gullible, to rely on assuming that there is a hidden truth, that you can find this truth, and that you can reveal it to others, and that through revealing this information, you will achieve subversion and change. And this is something that Sedgwick criticizes and warns against. She says that, in fact, frequently the truth is not so hidden. The information does not require complicated searches, and even if we know about it, it may not necessarily achieve much change. But as a matter of fact, it has been argued that paranoid readings are predominant in literary and cultural studies. Paul Ricoeur calls this hermeneutics of suspicion. So here it's an approach that sees texts as inherently deceptive. There is some kind of hidden meaning, and the goal of literary theory is to find these meanings and decipher them. Ngai and Sedgwick concur that critical theory, including feminist scholarship, including queer studies, often relies, or maybe too often relies, on paranoid language. Accordingly, the fact that the work of a literary cultural scholar deciphering meanings parallels the tasks of a protagonist of a thriller may partly account for the genre's popularity among us, film and TV scholars, why we like them so much and why we want to talk about them so much. And paranoid thinking gives rise to conspiracy theories. So conspiracy theories can be defined as a way of explaining an event through actions of a small group of powerful people while rejecting the more broadly accepted narrative. Conspiracy theories have been formulated about such events and facts as Shakespeare's authorship, the moon landing, Kennedy's assassination, 9/11, the origins of AIDS and COVID pandemics, the existence of various shadowy groups who are purported to wield power over humanity, connections between vaccinations and a number of different conditions, most commonly autism, and so on and so forth. However, the problem with conspiracies is that some conspiracies actually exist, and sometimes conspiracy theories or interpretations of facts that are initially believed to be conspiracy theories and to be irrational turn out to be accurate. I don't want to go into details to talk about specific ones, but in her recent book, Doppelganger, Naomi Klein talks about the complex relationship between the popularity of conspiracy theories and the existence of groups that actually do wield enormous power and wealth. Politicians, lobbyists, billionaires. Those groups, those people operate both in broad daylight and under the cover of some secrecy, thanks to non-disclosure agreements and so on. And Klein argues that on the one hand, conspiracy theories, like pandemic is a hoax, may be a reaction to the incomprehensibility and vastness of injustice that we face nowadays, but on the other, they make us gullible when faced with operations of global power. Because the language of talking about global power and the language of talking about conspiracy theories is so similar. So to talk about capitalism, technology, surveillance, climate injustice will sound irrational and paranoid, and nobody wants to believe a Cassandra. But we do like to watch and read stories that are about alienated, knowledge-seeking protagonists. And that's where conspiracy thriller genre comes in. Conspiracies and conspiracy theories find their fictional and non-fiction representations in this genre, which encompasses a variety of media, including films, novels, comic books, and others. These stories follow protagonists who are often journalists or detectives who come across an all-encompassing conspiracy, often reaching highest levels of power and going back in time. Common themes include imposters, governments covertly working against their citizens, illegal widespread surveillance, secret societies, and orchestrated suppression of world-altering truth. Extremely popular in the 60s and 70s, which we associate with the large number of political scandals and controversies of the time. Watergate, Vietnam, the aforementioned assassination of Kennedy. However, while the popularity of the conspiracy thriller may have abated temporarily, the narrative continues to cross-pollinate with other genres and themes, from superhero stories to buddy comedies, across science fiction and mystery, reaching all the way to television. Television has, in fact, had a substantial presence in the history of conspiracy fiction, in particular in procedural, spy, and science fiction genres, but not only. Shows like The Prisoner, Alias, Fringe, or Scandal have centered entire seasons around conspiracies that protagonists disentangle, often discovering in the process that their own identity and everything that they know about the world is actually false and suspect, based on lies, leading to dysphoric apprehension and legitimizing feelings of feelings of paranoia. These characters face dystopian secret governments, discover that their families and friends have been substituted with identical imposters, or that they are members of secret societies and have hidden agendas. They face entire alternate realities that influence our own world, or even we find out that they are themselves members of conspiracies, and that they are the danger we should be paranoid about. And of course, a discussion of conspiracy fiction television could not be complete without mentioning the air text of the genre, The X-Files. This is a show I'm sure almost everybody has heard of, but just to recap very quickly, it centers around two FBI agents, skeptical scientist Dana Scully and her partner, conspiracy theorist Fox Mulder, as they gradually uncover a vast global operation whose goal is to enable an alien invasion. And the story includes super soldiers replacing government figures, depopulation plans by means of a sentient virus, black oil, secret government factions working within American government to enable the alien invasion, evil aliens and good aliens fighting over the fate of humanity. If these storylines sound familiar even though you haven't seen The X-Files, that may be because similar conspiracy theories continue to be spread even today. And I would like to argue that while conspiracy motives have never gone away, they seem particularly omnipresent on television these days. Examples from the last 10 to 15 years would include thrillers detailing fictional and historical conspiracies, superhero television shows, horror television series, science fiction, of course. There are probably more seasons and more episodes of Black Mirror that I could talk about, but I like Apocalypse because it brings to mind another conspiracy horror, an early one, Rosemary's Baby, which is also reflected in the recent season, and those themes of reproductive conspiracies are fairly common as well. I won't have enough time to talk about them, but I highly recommend this subject. So, like the canonical examples of the genre, recent series will feature post-apocalyptic totalitarian futures, talk about omnipresent surveillance, and of course, focus on capitalist oppression and resulting alienation. And I would like to talk about 3 different recent series depicting very different conspiracies. The oldest of the 3, The Good Fight, is a spin-off of the legal political drama The Good Wife. The Good Wife was not a conspiracy thriller, but The Good Fight moves in this direction, with its protagonists, a group of liberal lawyers and investigators from a black-owned firm, who are stumbling across one conspiracy after another in a world that never strays too far from realism, but which shows that reality is feverish, is dreamlike, is Kafkaesque, is maybe even a little bit dystopian and apocalyptic. And that is because of the erosion of democratic norms, which renders our perception suspect. The show has been described as a satire on the Trump administration, but it does so specifically through recourse to the conspiracy thriller. The second series I want to discuss involves fewer, but arguably even more sinister conspiracies, because ones that possess a supernatural and explicitly evil. I'm sorry, I will say the title of the show multiple times today. Evil conspiracies. So created by the same group of creatives as The Good Fight, Evil is not complete yet. We don't know the ending of the story, unfortunately. It shows contemporary United States as a space of incomprehensible technological and spiritual forces, and the characters uncover a conspiracy that may be connected to the coming apocalypse, final confrontation of good and evil. The characters in question are fairly similar to the X-Files characters in that we have a spectrum from rationality to belief in conspiracy theories. So these are David, a priest in training who believes, Kristen, a psychologist who is more skeptical but comes to believe in the supernatural, and finally Ben, a technical expert and a lapsed Muslim, and Ben represents the skeptical end of the spectrum. And finally, the third series I want to talk about today also combines the supernatural and technology in its representation of conspiracy-riddled alternative world, which is ruled over by an all but all-powerful algorithm, the eponymous Mrs. Davis. This is a limited series, only 8 episodes. It has been completed. It's also the only one of the 3 that has a significant comedy element. And it takes place in this alternative contemporary world organized around the benevolent AI, which possesses so much power and micromanages human lives. The characters include Sister Simone, a nun, Wiley, her ex-boyfriend, who is simultaneously an AI collaborator and a member of an anti-AI group, and finally, Jesus, or as the show calls him, Jay, Simone's husband, who is also the religious figure. So in my analysis, I wanted to focus on 3 aspects of these shows. The first one is what kinds of conspiracies and plots do they represent and how do they do that? The second one was the representation of paranoia, whether the characters become paranoid, whether this paranoia provides them with more insight or with less. And finally, the relationship to the truth. So is it possible to reveal the truth, and does revealing the truth actually enable the characters to change things, to gain more power? So let me begin anti-chronologically at the end with Mrs. Davis. The conspiracy here is not particularly fear-inducing, and neither is it that secret. Because people know that Mrs. Davis exists. They are in constant contact with her. However, she definitely possesses too much power. The protagonist becomes increasingly paranoid, but also starts off paranoid. She has reasons to suspect everybody, her friends and her family, of having hidden agendas, because they do have hidden agendas, and she continues to be manipulated by both the AI, the anti-AI groups, and even her husband, who is a deity. So some problems with the truth on the show include the fact that whenever we find out the truth, it quickly turns out that it was only partial truth, that any answer leads to another question, any revelation leads to another mystery. So for instance, we have the secret religious society, the Templar nuns, protecting the Holy Grail. This is a kind of canonical conspiracy thriller storyline. However, what we initially think we know about them is quickly revealed to be just a way to manipulate us. There is another layer to the mystery, and then another layer to the second layer, and so on. Another problem that the show showcases is that it's difficult to trust people when almost everyone is part of this semi-visible conspiracy. Almost everyone in the show follows the algorithm requests, seems willing to be its voice. You can see in this image here a character with an earbud, so she is listening to the algorithm and speaking for it in a conversation with someone who does not have their own device with Mrs. Davis on it yet. And finally, we have this religious dimension which is used for some comedic purposes as well. Ironically enough, this scene has a deity talking about the algorithm in terms that sound very much like how we describe deities. She is all-knowing and all-powerful. She has access to everything that has been written. She's incomprehensible. She's so dangerous. And when it comes to revelation, so even though initially it seems like every time we find something out, some next mystery arises, ultimately knowledge can be obtained on Mrs. Davis, and it does lead to change. Simone is able to find out the truth about Mrs. Davis and her origins and her goals. She also finds out the truth about the Holy Grail. She manages to get it, she manages to drink from it, and she changes the world through it. She convinces Mrs. Davis to delete itself and to stop influencing humanity. However, the ambivalence remains when it comes to the effects of this, because taking responsibility, trying to place this responsibility on individuals rather than higher powers, whether technological or religious ones, ultimately leads at least partly to chaos, even though that's a necessary condition of freedom in the show. When it comes to evil, the conspiracy at the center of evil is also difficult to comprehend, incomprehensible to the protagonists, and some of the problems connected to understanding it arise from the fact that religious dogmatism and rationality both turn out to be sources of gullibility. Not believing in evil or believing in evil and thinking that one understands it and knows its rules are both strategies that allow evil to continue its demonic conspiracy, which involves a plot to implant supernatural evil fetuses in women undergoing in vitro fertilization, involves collaborating with humans, and those humans are both members of powerful institutions, but also simple individuals, regular humans, members of one's family. Nobody can be trusted because anyone might be tempted. We also have those classics like Vatican cover-up of evidence, and many levels to this one demonic conspiracy. When it comes to the representation of the truth is difficult to find and share because institutions that are looking for the truth or that we might use in order to reveal the truth, or even the basic institution of the family, they are all infiltrated by those who collaborate with evil. Worse yet, distrust should extend even to one's own self, because our own perception may be influenced and we may be tempted to turn towards evil. So finding out the truth requires humility, cooperation, and trust, which is almost impossible. The series is particularly interested in drawing links and parallels between incomprehensibility of technology, the effects of online radicalization that technology facilitates, and forces of evil, malicious intent, metaphorically represented as demonic activity. It involves storylines about an alliance between literal demons and, say, online trolls, like incels, or unscrupulous influencers who are willing to sell their souls in exchange for likes and follows. It also shows how language of therapy, emancipation, or even social justice can be twisted to further the goals of malicious forces. So this, for instance, is one of the villains of the show, Leland, pictured speaking to his demon therapist, who is persuading him to take control of his life, is coaching him, and this coaching leads him towards evil. And in the world of the show, then, being paranoid is an understandable, perhaps even somewhat legitimate response, because the world is terrifying and it is full of conspiracies, and anyone may have a hidden agenda. However, paranoia is still not empowering, I would argue. In fact, it is disempowering. It facilitates embracing an ends justify the means approach. It may lead to short-term gains. Like in the screenshot I'm showing you right now, this is from an early episode in which the protagonist, Kristen, uses deepfake technology to protect a teenager. However, her willingness to use the tools of evil gradually leads her to a crisis of morality when she cannot trust her own perception, she cannot trust her own self. So when it comes, and finally, when it comes to whether the truth will ultimately set the protagonists free, we don't know yet. The characters for now have limited access to truth, and they have extremely limited access to revealing the truth to others. But perhaps the future seasons will answer this question one way or another. And finally, my favorite, The Good Fight. The Good Fight features a very large number of conspiracies. In fact, almost every season introduces new ones. And they are connected to both alt-right and alt-left organizations, and they evoke increasing, growing amounts of paranoia in the characters. The protagonists attempt to combat their paranoia in different ways. They go to therapy, they medicate and self-medicate, and through legal and illegal means, and they look for the truth. And occasionally they find something out. However, the conspiracies cannot be easily revealed because they are so absurd, because their form, instead of empowering the characters, may silence them, deprive them of power, and deprive them of being able to articulate their knowledge. And what is particularly interesting about The Good Fight is the way in which it combines reality and fiction to talk about conspiracies. So I would say that the conspiracy storylines on The Good Fight fall into three broad categories. The first would be exploring common conspiracy theories. So there are conspiracy theories about various things, and the show has characters encounter those conspiracy theories. So, for instance, in a season 2 episode, characters come across compromising materials about the president, a recording which they may or may not be faked. And this is a reference to the so-called Steele dossier. The second category, the second type of conspiracy, would be when the show represents a conspiracy created for its own purposes, so a made-up conspiracy theory. However, it is supposed to explain real events in the world. And this is the case of Memo 618, a storyline in season 4. This is a secret code word which in the show is used by the government to pressure judges to permit illegal conduct by the government and government officials and various institutions. The show suggests that this is how the Abu Ghraib prison was possible, how torture under the guise of enhanced interrogation happened. It's even connected to the internment camps for Japanese Americans during World War II. These are all screenshots from the episode. What is particularly interesting here is that the memo itself contains no writing. There is nothing to the memo outside of its title. The characters want to find out what the memo says. It doesn't say anything. It is an empty signifier. However, the government can use it, refer to it in order to pressure and influence people who should be protecting the weakest members of society. And finally, the third type of conspiracy introduced on the show involves fictional events with fictional explanations. Although those are typically created in a way that evokes something real and recognizable. For instance, we have the P-anon conspiracy, which is similar to the Q-anon conspiracy, or we have the collective, a group, a shadowy group working behind the scenes to combat white supremacists, which is somewhat evocative of Black Panthers, Antifa, Black Lives Matter movement, and kind of the CIA as well. So they built secret prisons in the Antarctic to house white supremacists who cannot be prosecuted legally. Remarkably, this particular conspiracy draws attention to the ways in which the knowledge seeker's identity, their race and gender in particular, influences their access to legitimate means of protecting oneself. So when there is a white supremacist conspiracy directed against our Black protagonists, they try to get help from the government, from the police, through legitimate means, and they find themselves disbelieved, without recourse to legitimate protection, ignored, and then this partly perhaps legitimizes this recourse to a conspiracy. And I would like to I wouldn't like to make you think, however, that the show is largely in favor of conspiracies and conspiracy theories. In fact, it remains primarily critical of conspiracies and of paranoia as a way of organizing knowledge. An episode that illustrates this quite well is another episode from season 4. The gang discovers who killed Jeffrey Epstein. So the storyline concerns the real, arguably mysterious death by suicide of American financier and millionaire, and Jeffrey Epstein, which has given rise to numerous conflicting conspiracy theories. In the episode, characters are tasked with falsifying or confirming the official narrative of his death, so that he committed suicide in prison. And while they initially expect to find themselves able to prove that it was not a conspiracy, they start off claiming that it's probably the result of incompetence or an accident that he was able to commit suicide. He was not prevented from doing so. Gradually, they discover more and more information that points them towards the existence of a conspiracy. They are drawn down a rabbit hole of clues. They go on a scavenger hunt for cryptic messages and symbols, and they end up in a place that evokes those conspiracy storylines. On an island, in a place filled with strange artifacts. However, ultimately, this pursuit of knowledge leaves them empty-handed. The closer they come to the truth, the more paranoid and irrational they not only become, but also sound, which leads the government authorities to shutting them down, stopping the investigation before they could uncover the full extent of the conspiracy. The truth is revealed to the viewers, so the characters don't find out the truth, but the viewers find out the truth in an elaborate intertextual joke which evokes Parasite and Citizen Kane at the same time, but the viewers are simultaneously castigated by the characters in dialogue for treating the investigation as a puzzle, which, as one of the characters argues, is a failure of empathy, because this is not a whodunit, it is a tragedy that we are talking about here. This certainly could be seen as the show's message about the ways conspiracy theories, so cognitively attractive, represent a danger, a risk to society, even when conspiracies actually exist, which I think resonates with Sedgwick's warnings about paranoia being a gullible stance. So let me just finish by once again turning to Naomi Klein's warnings about the dangers of looking for secret conspiracies. Power and wealth certainly do conspire to protect themselves, but it's not just in private, it's also in public. And as I hope to have demonstrated, conspiracy storylines are remarkably popular in recent television series. If the popularity of the genre in the 60s and 70s correlated with erosion of trust in democratic institutions, a similar conclusion can be drawn about this present trend. The paranoid or knowledge-seeking protagonists of conspiracy thrillers once again find themselves isolated, unable to trust institutions, authorities, and even their own cognitive powers when standing against fake news, deregulated capitalism, technologically enabled surveillance, or even the old classic secret societies wielding power with no oversight. Looking for the truth in those shows is challenging, and finding it is usually no guarantee of defeating conspiracies. Some exceptions exist, so there is a defeated conspiracy in Mrs. Davis, but for the most part, revealing the truth has limited power. As in the world of fakes, anything can be dismissed, and the more horrible the truth, the more difficult it is to articulate and convey. Perhaps what we should be paying attention to here, and what we should notice here, is that developing tendency towards ambivalence when it comes to conspiracy theories. The conspiracy narrative is not simply embraced and taken on, but instead it is represented in a humorous or parodic manner and criticized within the text. I think a more detailed study could explore this direction further. So these are some of my sources. And let me leave you with an optimistic conclusion from person of interest. And thank you for watching.